Hello, we're just letting people into the meeting. We have around 200 registrants, so I think people will be joining gradually in the next couple of minutes. So if you bear with us, if you could mute your microphones, please. We'll mute them for you as well. And then in a couple of minutes we'll start. We have the two speakers on board as well. And my name's Nick Ferguson, and I'm from Trust IT Services and the EOSC Secretariat project, which supports the EOSC governance and in particular the executive board. So we'll just wait a couple of minutes for people to come on, and then we'll start on time.
Nick, quick question. I have Owen from EGI just texted me to say he doesn't have the password to get into the webinar. Is there a password?
Yeah, I've had the very same question from Catherine. So I'm wondering if...
Is it possible, I don't know if this is going to be a quick fix, but is it possible to change the setting on that call without knocking it off and making it non-password required? If that's the case, many of them don't have it.
What we can do is we could let me just check internally. Hold on a second.
I see the password, by the way, in the invitation, so I'm not sure if they're just not reading down.
Oh, right. Okay. Let me just, as Christoph Brooks just put it in chat as well. I'm going to just copy that to Catherine. Is it the same password you have?
So we'll put the password in the chat there.
Yeah. Okay. So 972941.
Yeah, it's the same, Sarah. That's the one.
Yeah. Okay. So hopefully other people have that. There's a number joining now, so I think we'll be good to go shortly.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning, Catherine.
Morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Morning.
You can see the numbers increasing.
Yeah,
I guess we would have
100 participants, and I'm absolutely going to be right at some moment in time. Maybe
at some moment in time, but I think yeah, we all had a bet before we started on how many participants we'd get. So all root for 137. That's my bet. I see we've even got people from overseas. I saw Adrian Burton's name on the list come up there. Very good.
Karel, quick point. I've sent you the link on WhatsApp, and I've sent it to you here privately to the SRIA planning document with all the sections. So you should be able to access that now.
Okay, I found it in my telephone, but it's difficult to read.
So what I suggest we do is we start when we get to 100. We're on 96 now, so
let's hope there's just like not stuck on 99
for half an hour.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we are not live yet.
Yes.
Yeah. We are, but we aren't recording yet. I don't think.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. So.
Okay, here we are. So we're 100 participants now.
Ah, see, I told you.
There we go. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll start. People are joining as we speak. So my name's Nick Ferguson, and I represent the EOSC Secretariat project, and I come from Trust IT Services, and the Secretariat project supports the the EOSC governance, in particular the EOSC Executive Board. And today's webinar is part of a broader stakeholder engagement set of activities to ensure engagement with the EOSC community and beyond in co-creating, co-designing the European Open Science Cloud. This is an important time for the governance, as we've seen the publication of the SRIA Open Consultation, and today's webinar will focus exactly on that. So the Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda. We have two speakers who are key to this document, which is Karel Luyben, who's from Delft University and represents the CESAER community, which represents the science and technology universities across Europe, so a key stakeholder for EOSC. And he's also the co-chair of the EOSC Executive Board. We also have Sarah Jones, who's who is the chair of the FAIR Working Group, and she is also the new EOSC engagement manager at GÉANT. So today's webinar is basically going to be split in two parts. We'll have presentations from Karel and Sarah Jones, where we'll look at the SRIA document and the open consultation process. And then we'll have time for questions and answers, so an extended questions and answers session. I'd kindly ask everyone to put yourselves on mute. We'll also make sure you're on mute, and we'll deal with questions in that half an hour we have for questions and answers, okay? So you can put your questions in the chat and we'll try and get through as many questions as possible in the time that we have. And then if we don't, then we'll try to get back to you after the webinar. The open consultation, there's references to it, you'll have seen. I mean, you'll have seen this if you've registered for the webinar. There's an accompanying document as well, which Karel and Sarah will go over. And then finally, I'd also just like to put this in a broader context with the EOSC Symposium, which is coming up in October. This will be an online event, and this will be a key event for the structuring of the governance and also in presenting the final version of the SRIA there. So with that, I'll stop sharing and I'll hand over to Karel. So Karel, if you'd like to share your slides.
Yes, I will.
Okay, I'd also like to just say that I'd like to thank everyone for joining. We have 200 people registered from over 35 different countries, and I see in the chat even from Australia. So that's fantastic and shows the level of interest that we have in this topic in the tail end of July with hot weather and holidays approaching. So Karel, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Nick. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, then I would like to welcome everybody to this webinar where Sarah and I are going to tell you about the consultation process we have planned in order to co-create a SRIA together. What is a SRIA? So that's one of the first questions we would like to address. Well, this is the abbreviation for a Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda. And here you have an example of the definition of the Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda for the space sector. So the main purpose of this agenda, they write, is to provide a coordinated guidance and recommendations for the next EU Research and Innovation Framework Program, being Horizon Europe from 2021 till 2027, on the strategic R&I needs to support the competitiveness of the European space sector in that case, and reinforce the independent access and use of space. The identification of the research and innovation needs for the space program components, and then they mention a few, will emerge from their own governance. And then they describe with whom they have drafted this research and innovation agenda. And basically, this is the same thing as is now happening for the EOSC domain. It's not a science domain. It is not a thematic domain. The EOSC domain, trying to share data, and I'll explain data later, is a quite different domain, which has its advantages and disadvantages. I will come back to that in my presentation. So if you would define the SRIA for EOSC and use just the text as I have given or picked from the internet, of course, for the space sector, then the main purpose of this agenda we are composing and co-creating in Europe is to provide a coordinated guidance and recommendation for the next framework program. So what we plan to do, or we intended to do, because were asked by the Commission to do so, is to help the Commission in, let's say, drafting the program for Horizon Europe with respect to the part for the EOSC in this case. And the total development is more than only the part that is going to be done by the programs of the Commission. I will also come back to that. This agenda, as you can see in the lower end of the slide, will be drafted in close consultation with all relevant stakeholders, including research performing organizations, research funding organizations, service providing organizations. I see there's a spelling mistake there. And this is what we start today, the co-creation process, and therefore we have this webinar to explain to you what it is, where we stand, where we go. This is a rather complicated slide, but this is to show you that on the left side where you see the EOSC association, and on the bottom you see the minimum viable EOSC, the thing we are trying to create with the new governance next year, being the governance of an association we are setting up actually formally tomorrow, that this SRIA will actually belong to this organization. So if I point out over there with the red oval, you can see the co-creation overarching the SRIA and the draft working program is to be made by this association. So this association, which is going to form a partnership with the Commission, has been asked, once it's there, once the partnership is there, to create a research and innovation agenda for this domain. Well, for the rest of the slide, you can see that all different inputs, not only coming from the SRIA, which is this line, but also coming from, let's say, the members, coming from the national funders, will contribute to forming what we now call the EOSC exchange in the minimum viable EOSC. How are we developing this? Well, we start with the strategic implementation plan, which is linked in this document, and you can get the document online later, and the EOSC partnership proposal. The partnership I was just talking about between the EOSC association, again, to be set up formally tomorrow, and the Commission. Then the Executive Board, together with the European Commission and the Governance Board, has developed a sort of high-level outline. And from that high-level outline, we extracted a document which is called the Consultation document, which is online now. And it's this document we want to put your attention to today in order to be involved in this consultation and input process. Main part of the document.
Just to wish Omar good luck. Just to wish Omar good luck. And
sorry, we can hear you. I don't know who that is. If you want to mute.
Okay, yeah, we've muted.
Okay.
Most of the input comes from let's say, important input with respect to KPIs, with respect to the action areas from the working group. So they are putting the content in, have been putting the content into this document, looking at the present status of those domains, looking at the gaps, and looking at the priorities. And Sarah will come to those. No, I will come to those in a minute. Okay. What is the overall vision? And maybe this is good to stand still with this picture for a few minutes. In our view, the association, with all parties being members of the association, research funders, research providers, service providers, sorry, research performing organizations, is going to develop what we call the web of fair data and services. And by data, and I will come back to that in a second also, we mean, we do include publications and software. And so this is going to be this part of the picture. But the whole ecosystem, or the whole landscape, which is even wider than the ecosystem, is the input every stakeholder in Europe can contribute to making this a coherent vision, where we want to reduce the fragmentation in the federating existing research infrastructures, to enable interdisciplinary research, a very difficult one with the interoperability, to support the open science and contribute to a single digital market, to offer the researchers, the digital researchers, the resources, they need to practice open science, to stimulate the emergence of a competitive EU cloud sector, and to give Europe a global lead in the research management. Of course, it's not the association that's going to do all this. Therefore, this color coding, this is the contribution of the association. The rest is the contribution of all parties in Europe, which jointly build what we call the EOSC ecosystem. As I said, if we use the word data, we mean all digital objects. And if we use the abbreviation FAIR, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, we mean that FAIR applies to all these digital objects. Yes, we will put extra effort on the, let's say, traditional data, because in contrary to the publications, there's much less work out there and much more work needed, as you can find in the report from Turning FAIR into Reality, produced by the expert group on that particular topic. We have defined what we call a EOSC objective tree, and I called this the EOSC objective tree for the EOSC ecosystem / landscape, because this objective tree is much wider than the only thing that is going to be done by the association. You could see the middle column basically as the part the association is going to contribute. But if you look at this, and if you look at the wider problems with respect to the improvement of open science, and the improvement of trust and the quality of science, you immediately recognize that this cannot and will not be done by the association. The association is going to be part of this, contribute this, stimulate this, and hopefully a lot of parties in Europe are going to help us to create a European EOSC landscape in line with these objectives. The three overarching objectives you find in that tree of the previous slide are the following three. Open science practices and skills are rewarded and taught to become the new normal. This will take a long time. In my view, 20 years. So this is not a short-term mission. Standards and tools and services that allow researchers to find, access, reuse, and combine results. This I hope we can do in a much shorter time frame, not to the final end. This will keep on developing over the years as well, but at least to show researchers that there is an advantage to share data and to be able to use data from other disciplines to interoperate data. And finally, the sustainable and federated infrastructures enabling open sharing of scientific results, those infrastructures that are there in Europe and the new ones to come, in order to combine these in line with the EOSC wishes, developments, and objectives. What are our guiding principles, of what are the guiding principles, not only for us, but for everybody in this system? As said before, we have to do it together. So this is a multi-stakeholder approach. And in line, of course, with the definition of open science, it will be as open as possible, but can be closed in those cases where needed, of course, in case of privacy or in case of security, as an example. The aim of the contribution of the association will be to create a web of what we call fair data and related services for the sciences. Ultimately, this, of course, is not a European venture. This is a worldwide venture. Ultimately, this is not only about the data and the digital objects coming from science, but about all the data and digital objects that are relevant to combine. But we have to start somewhere, and this is the European contribution to what will hopefully become a worldwide web of fair data. Intention is to federate existing research infrastructures, and an important guiding principle is that this use of data, use of digital objects has to be possible as well by people, of course, as by machines. Nowadays, data sets are so large that it's useless to think in terms of only people accessing those. You will always have a machine in between anyway if you use a computer. But on top of that, in many cases, you will not transport the data anymore. You will transport the software to the data in order to operate on the data with respect to the things you want to do. With the executive board and its working groups, we have translated these, let's say, overarching main priorities, strategic priorities as we call them, into 14 action areas. These are too many to discuss in detail, but you can all find them in the document on the consultation. And on the left side, these are the more, let's say, technical challenges to implement. like identifiers, metadata, the FAIR metrics. And on the right side, it's more the, let's say, boundary conditions we need to create in order to have this system working, like rules of participation, business models, but definitely things like skills and training. And ultimately, if we don't change the rewards and recognition system to include open science, the system will not stick and will not work in the long run. So you can read these slowly into the document. This is again too much text, but this is to show that we have translated these 14 action areas into twice 10 implementation priorities. So from the action areas, we have derived the priorities of the first things that need to be done in the near future. And these priorities are put in the document open for consultation. And we would like to hear your input on these priorities and on the actions. As Sarah will come back to that in a minute on how we are going to do that. Let me pick an example here. Implement metrics to assess fair digital objects and iterate based on testing. An obvious thing that needs to be done if we want to be able to have interoperability going. And this whole list contains at least these things we think are essential for the implementation priorities. There's another list of another 10 boundary conditions. By the way, it's coincidental that it's 2 times 10. We didn't aim for that, but this is the way it is. So some of the action areas have two priority lines and others have 1. Here you can find, for example, under 17, develop open science training and professionalize associated rules. So it's not only the training of the people, but also to make this a professional position for, let's say, data stewards in the landscape we are trying to create. 18, create a European-wide framework for rewards and recognition that includes open science. Rewards and recognition has to be done in the organization itself, so it cannot only rely on open science and it's not to be determined by open science, but it will have influence. These are examples of the type of boundary conditions where we think priority lies. Then we have to monitor, of course, the process and the progress in developing this whole ecosystem. And so we have defined 10 what's so-called KPIs. And these are illustrations of what we think could be KPIs. Again, in the document, we ask for your input. In the questionnaire on the web, we ask for your input, whether these are the right KPIs. Researchers are incentivized to perform open science. Well, in order to do that, a number of things need to be done. Or research data produced by publicly funded research in Europe is fair by design. If it's not fair ultimately, then it cannot be part of the system at all. And these KPIs can be monitored to a certain extent over time. These are not very exact KPIs, these are the high levels, but from these you can derive more detailed KPIs if needed to monitor the progress. And with that, I would like to stop my first part and give over to Sarah to talk you through the process. Sarah.
Excellent.
I'll stop sharing my screen and then you can.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so I'll share my screen and pick up from this consultation section. So what you've had from Karel is an overview of essentially what's in the SRIA document. And what I want to walk through now is just the practicalities of responding to the consultation. Sorry for the noise if you can hear that outside. So the basic information you need to know is about how long this consultation's open. It's open until the 31st of August, and the responses are via the web form on the EOSC Secretariat website. Now, you can log in, and that enables you to save your responses mid-draft, so that's particularly useful if you want to do it over a couple of sessions, or also if you're consulting within your organization to collate your views. You can also do this, just in one session, and you can do it without logging in, but just be mindful that, if you happen to close the browser, that could lose your responses. And you can choose to be anonymous if you want to in your responses too. So in terms of who should respond to this consultation, it's really anybody who has an interest or a stake in European research. So it could be the research performing organizations, universities and others, research funders, various service providers, so all of the e-infrastructures and research infrastructures, universities, library services, for example, various government organizations or businesses, or really anybody who feels that they have a part to play in European research and in the delivery of EOSC or the use of EOSC. Let me just advance the slide. So the web form structure really picks up on all of those elements that Karel has spoken about. So there's some basic information at the start about who you are, and there's a data protection section at the end just to validate that you're happy for your information to be reused. And then the main sections pick up on the guiding principles, the action areas, and the priorities. And really, these are the key areas for us. We want to understand that those 14 action areas we've defined are the right ones, that we're not missing anything critical, and that the priorities we've set are the appropriate priorities and really where the gaps and the issues are from your perspective. There are a number of sections as well, and I've seen some questions come up about this in the chat, about synergies with other initiatives, so things like the European data spaces or the missions, and alignment with different projects and programs. So where there are things you think we need to be working collaboratively across EOSC and other initiatives, please do flag those. And there's also a section about the role in your potential role in the EOSC Association. So I'll give a little bit of information about that. So essentially, the way the web form is structured, we ask really about the relevance of all of the content in the SRIA. So you can see an example here for the guiding principles. There's a sliding scale, and you're asked about each of the guiding principles and how relevant you think they are, whether you strongly agree or disagree. And the same kind of scale happens around the action areas and the priorities and the KPIs as well. So we want to know that the content we have in the SRIA is the right kind of content and actions that need to be addressed in the next framework program in order for us to build and deliver a successful EOSC. Now, in terms of the priorities, we go into more information on this in the consultation. So you'll see the various action areas that Karel's spoken about, like identifiers, and we have priorities. So the priority here is to implement the EOSC persistent identifier policy, and also to develop the additional infrastructure that's needed to enable that to function. So we ask about the relevance of that, but then we also ask about the urgency and the geographic scope of action. So when does this priority need to be addressed? Is it something that we have to be working on initially, or is it something that comes later down the line? And also, how does it need to be addressed? Is it something that we address at the institutional level or the national, or is it something that has to be done at European level? And there are also various aspects in the consultation that really ask about what's missing. So there's quite a lot of free text boxes as well as these sliding scales. We want to know whether there's a certain action area we've missed or certain priorities that we've missed. In terms of the KPIs, we give very kind of high level areas in which we could have KPIs. There might be alternative areas you think we need, or you might also have ideas of measures or levels of acceptance we should be looking for. And there are also options for you to add various general other comments that you have. So please do use those free text options to give your kind of rich feedback. We also ask, as I mentioned earlier, about the various synergies and alignments. So we ask specifically about how EOSC can support the various Horizon Europe partnerships and the missions. We look at the connection of EOSC to other European data spaces or alliances with various open science organizations. And these could be within Europe, or they might be international organizations that we need to work with. And there may be other projects or programs that you think we need to align with. So please do flag things that you think are of relevance to EOSC and should be kind of built into relationships in that next framework program. Now, the final aspect of the consultation form asks about the EOSC Association. And this is the legal entity which is being established, essentially, to sign that partnership agreement with the European Commission. And I wanted to give you a quick update on the status of this legal entity. The Executive Board of EOSC and the Governance Board have collectively agreed 4 founding members. They're CESAER, which is a kind of representative body of technical universities, GÉANT, ICDI in Italy, which is a consortium of data center and infrastructures, and CSIC, which is the Research Council in Spain. And these 4 members will be represented tomorrow. They're going to the notary to incorporate the association. And we'll be accepting the other eligible members immediately thereafter. So a number of people have registered interest in the EOSC Association. So far, by reviewing the applications, there's only a couple of bodies that aren't eligible according to the statutes because they're ministries, and we've said that ministries can't be members just because for some countries that's not legally viable. So what will happen after the incorporation is that people will be emailed out, you know, about that acceptance, and to ask that they send a legal letter from their representative to ensure that they uphold the principles of EOSC and agree with the statutes and the rules of participation. And there's a provisional acceptance which is then ratified through the General Assembly. And we plan to hold 2 General Assemblies this year. A first one really just to widen that membership. So we go beyond those founding 4 to the wider membership, so that then any decisions made about the association and the bylaws and how things operate are done by the wider group. And we plan to have a main General Assembly in December where the president will be elected as well as the board of directors, and the budget will be set, because then we also know the membership and what funds we'll be getting from membership fees. And Catherine's written a blog post about this. There will also be more notifications coming out after the incorporation tomorrow, but we're in a very good state now, and we're really looking forward to growing that membership. So finally, just to talk about how you can shape the agenda. I mean, one of the critical things to do is to answer the consultation. You want to make sure that your voice is heard, and also that your community, whether that's your disciplinary community, your country, or the area that you work in, make sure they're represented. Please do ensure you engage in events. So be active in the stakeholder forum and upcoming events like the EOSC Symposium. And I would encourage you to also look at the association and consider joining as a member, because that's a way that you can actually shape the way that things are taken forward. And the link here takes you to the consultation, so please do have a look at that. The overall set of questions you're asked is available as a downloadable document, so you can reflect on that before you go and fill in the web form. And yeah, that's all I really had to say. Just encourage you to work with us to co-create the EOSC, and we are happy to take any questions. So I will come out of this screen share, and I don't know if Nick wants to take over with the moderation.
Okay, yeah. So thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you very much, Karel, for the very comprehensive presentations. So, as I said at the beginning of the webinar, if you've got any questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll try to deal with them as many as possible now. We're going to try and group them together as well as they're coming in, yeah, I'll be putting them to both Karel and Sarah now. So the first question is quite a general question. And that is, can I also ask you all to keep muted? Okay. So we'll be dealing with the questions in the chat, okay? And then if necessary, if there's any clarification from Karel or Sarah, then they'll ask you to unmute. So the first question is quite a general one. And that is, before we enter into the more deeper questions that we've had, because some of them are on quite important details, from both of you, what's the most important thing that can come out of the open consultation that will really help to develop the SRIA and the final version, which is what you're going to be working on when the open consultation closes?
Yeah, sure. So I'm happy to give my perspective here. For me, I think it's really important to understand the needs from the community at large. So we've put forward a kind of framework of what action areas and priorities we need to address. And this, as Karel mentioned, this has come together from, you know, the executive board, but also the wider EOSC working group. So it's quite a large group that's fed into that. But you know, EOSC is to support everybody who's engaged in research, and there will be many people from universities and different research groups who are probably struggling with certain aspects and have expectations from EOSC or certain needs, and it would be good to really understand whether we've got the right priorities and also which are the most critical or the most pressing.
Yeah, from my part, I of course agree with that, but maybe it's good to add the following, that in many of the domains covered by the Research and Innovation Program from the Commission, Horizon Europe, we are either talking about a discipline or a set of disciplines, or you're talking about a certain theme or domain or general topic to be covered. In this case, it is a very wide thing. It's basically for all the researchers, it's for all the disciplines, it's for all the domains. And this makes it interesting on the one hand, but very difficult on the other hand, because you would like to have the input from all those and try to combine that input in creating something that serves all those. And why is that? This is because it's possible nowadays. We have the technology to do this. We could not do this 20 years ago, so it is not here, it doesn't exist. But we are at the verge of trying to make it possible due to the fact that the technology exists. However, there is no industry behind this. There is no driving force behind this of a set of disciplines that has a well-known set of questions and things they struggle with. So this makes it somewhat more difficult to tackle this area than in the disciplines or in the thematic schemes. Nevertheless, we try to combine all these things into what we call EOSC. And ultimately, as I said, let's say 10, 20 years from now, this is to be a worldwide thing and not a European thing only.
Okay, thank you, Karel. I think that's an important point to make, that the international aspect of EOSC. There was a list in one of the slides earlier on who should respond, and there's research performing organizations, research funding organizations, service providers, government organizations, companies and business. So this is very broad. There's a question from Patrick Fura. Apologies for my pronunciation, everybody. I'll say that at the beginning. Where do individual researchers or individual people sit within this for responding to the open consultation?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because it's not in that list, but it's by no means meant to restrict individuals from responding. I think when the consultation form had been put together, there was a kind of estimation that people would want to group together, so answer as a research group or as a collective, but there's nothing to stop people responding as individuals. So by all means do, and I guess maybe we should add researcher as a category rather than just put it under other.
It is there, Sarah. There is the
Okay.
researcher category, there is the individual category. You can in the web form say whether you're answering as an individual or on behalf of an organization. And so the input of individuals is as welcome as of everybody else.
Okay,
absolutely.
good.
It is there.
Okay, so thank you. The next question is something which Karel touched on in his response to my question in relation to the different groups as well, different stakeholder groups in EOSC, and it's from Nora Dorenbacher. What link to the emerging European data spaces does the EOSC SRIA envision?
Yeah, this is also a very good question, and I would like to know the answer on that one. So far, the link is that we are, all of us, including EOSC, mentioned in the data document that came out February of this year by the European Commission. And in that document, it's even suggested that EOSC is a sort of example for the other data spaces. We have been saying time and time again that we're very open to link to those data spaces, to link to other programs from the Commission, whether they are co-programmed or co-funded partnerships. Basically, EOSC is valuable for all the partnerships because it's valuable for all the research. Now, we cannot link to up to 50 partnerships, so we have to, let's say, make our choices. But so far, all these are under development. So from our side, we continue saying, you're welcome. We'd like to join forces, but many of these partnerships have not even put out their partnership proposal on the web. So, and many of them have not mentioned EOSC. So we need to, let's say, bring the message across in order to link up to those partnerships, to those data spaces. But yes, it's part of the data spaces of Europe.
Okay, thank you for that, Karel. And a kind of connected question is from Nicholas Villacorta, which is, Nicholas was also interested in knowing the link with the thematic European data spaces and the SRIA.
Well, Sarah, if I continue, same story. This is relevant for all the thematic activities in the European research and innovation domain. So please take note of this, have your communities become a member of this organization and try to implement, let's say, the technology principles and possibilities that come out of EOSC. And we do not have a specific preference for A, B, or C. As far as I'm concerned, all the thematic topics are relevant. Let me give you an example of what has been very relevant in the very recent history. This is, of course, health with respect to COVID-19. We have seen that the Commission and a lot of other organizations put an effort on getting a combination of data for COVID-19 into a more accessible form and easier to, let's say, not only access, but also to view. And we've learned that that brings great advantages to, let's say, dealing with COVID-19, but we also learned that there are definitely things missing, like the interoperability between clinical data and biological data. They simply come from different domains and they do not have the same standards and they cannot be combined yet. And these type of, let's say, use cases are very valuable from the thematic domains.
Yeah, I'll maybe just add to that as well. So what you'll see in the Tin Man document, we have a vision of, you know, like building the EOSC at first and focusing on this research area and then expanding out to other sectors, so the public and the private sectors. So I think a lot of these things will come in different phases or waves of work. But also there was another question in the chat around the missions. And I think there's so many different initiatives that the Commission's running, you know, so obviously in this Horizon Europe program, we've got this EOSC work, but we've got all of these different data spaces and thematic data infrastructures, and also the missions that were mentioned. And what we're trying to do is to build links wherever possible. So when we were developing the EOSC work plan, we tried to pick up on some of the missions and use those as use cases. So as Karel mentioned, COVID has been a really ideal, well, it's not an ideal situation, but it's a very good use case to show how we can respond with our research infrastructures and how we can actually have a positive effect on society by sharing data in a rapid response and actually really supporting the research initiatives. So
yeah, maybe Sarah, it's good to add that we expect that as of next year, if the association is running and a number of individuals are employed by this association, there is an office, that the response to all these things will be broader and quicker.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's a group of 11 people in the executive board that have to do this in their free time on top of the normal work. And then it will be a more professional organization. So we will be able to deal with more in the future than we can deal with today.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for a lot of these initiatives, they're in that setup phase, like we are. So, you know, there will be more opportunities as we go forward to build those links. But if you have ideas, please do add them to the consultation, because then that gives a set of actions that people can follow through.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, this is the point of it, really, to encourage people to do exactly that, Sarah, isn't it? So a comment really from Lisha Verde. It's that there's a lot of disciplines which are more ahead than others, and others which perhaps lag behind in this openness and sharing. And there are lessons to be learned from these disciplines, perhaps also lessons to be learned from things which maybe don't work, as well as things that do work. for in terms of the Federation service and fair data. Okay, we're having quite a few questions on different aspects of the SRIA and quite a few questions about the actual EOSC association. So we'll keep on dealing with the SRIA ones, and then we'll address the EOSC association ones in a moment. One question is, or comment from Owen Appleton on the KPIs. His comment is that these are more critical success factors on which KPIs are based, not KPIs. I wondered if you have a comment on that, or?
So, I mean, we changed this section at a late stage because we did have KPIs that had come out of the partnership proposal, but they weren't well matched to the content of what's in the action areas because they've come from different documents and different writing processes. And what we wanted to do is give areas where KPIs, could be focused, but it would be really helpful for people to give ideas of how they would be measured or what the level of attainment should be. So by all means, look at the partnership proposal for some KPIs for the association. But this is an area that there'll be more work going on over summer. And if you want to speak to that as well, Karel.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. These are more the overarching things, and as Owen rightfully mentions, these are basically critical success factors rather than exact KPIs. But from these KPIs can be derived. There are some examples indeed in the partnership proposal. In the ultimate SRIA, because this is a consultation document on the items we have to and will consult on, there's more to the SRIA, like a general introduction, what is open science and what is it for, and how do we broaden to the rest of the world and things like that. But in the actual SRIA, the KPIs will be as good as possible there. So please, as Sarah says, give us suggestions and input on what you think are relevant KPIs for this domain.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next question is around what was explained on the guiding principles, and if you could clarify, this is from Tor Bloch, if you could clarify what machines and people means.
You go first, Sarah.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things inherent in the FAIR principles is that things don't just work for individuals. So when you're trying to read something, it's not just in a way that a human can interpret, it's something that a machine can also interpret, and that enables greater reuse because you can have the machine act on something directly. So that's one of the principles, that we're not just building EOSC for individuals. We want people to be able to use machines to go and aggregate a whole set of data and to do processing on that. So we want the data in a form that it can be understood and used by machines. So this is what the interoperability framework that we're putting in place through the FAIR Working Group and Architecture collectively is addressing.
Yeah, and I tend to say there's no human being that goes through the data as in the past with a pile of papers and a pen. Everybody uses a machine to, let's say, access the data. Of course, a different type of software and a different type of machines. But the machine readability, actionability is a better word, of data is extremely important, especially if you talk about large data sets.
Yeah.
Maybe Nick, I would like to reflect on, with 2 sentences on what you said before with respect to those disciplines that are not as advanced as some people say. I think they have an advantage because they will not be stuck into the mistakes other disciplines may be making or have made, and they will be from the beginning able to be more interdisciplinary and connected than some of the disciplines that have created a system for themselves, but have at that time not been able or not thinking about creating the system for, let's say, interoperability with other disciplines. So I tend to talk about the long tail of disciplines and the long tail of countries. Some people don't want to speak about the long tail of disciplines, but there is a difference in, let's say, where the different disciplines are. Yep.
Okay, thank you. And I think this answer covers the question from Marcus Stocker as well on the fair publication. So Marcus, I
Yeah.
hope that's
So
answered yours.
I'm actually just typing a response to that, so we can make sure we give the responses to these questions. But just a quick thing for Marcus. So he asked about whether whether we mean publications are also fair for machines. And one thing I'd just stress is that FAIR's a scale. So I think at minimum, we want the metadata for the publication to be machine actionable so they can be discovered. And ideally, the actual content of the publication would be in a format that people can do text mining or analyze it. But, you know, we want things to be as fair as possible.
Okay, there's actually another connected question that's just come in now from Kostas Koumantaros. So the R in FAIR stands for reproducible, but I see too few mentions of services and computing in SRIA and how it will be managed to support open science in FAIR.
Yeah, so the R, it stands for reusable. I mean, there's some debate, people prefer different things, but I think the importance is that people can use the data in any way. Is important, obviously, to be able to reproduce science. We do cover computing in the SRIA as well. So we talk about like the minimum viable EOSC being kind of 3 layers. So we have the underlying overarching services, so things like the network and the basic metrics and things that make EOSC work. And then we have the federated data. And then we have a whole range of services that can act on that data. So obviously computing is in there, as well as various other analysis tools that researchers would use. But if you have ideas of ways that we can enhance that in the SRIA, please do add them into the consultation, because I think some things, you know, maybe haven't come through well enough in the text.
Okay, thank you. Another question from Kostas is regarding reference to e-infrastructures. So there's no reference to infrastructures in the document, and is this on purpose?
Well, there's a lot of reference to infrastructures in the SRIA consultation document. Maybe not in our presentation now, but I don't understand if you say there's no reference to infrastructures. It is, well, first of all, what infrastructures? Are we talking about e-infrastructures? Are we talking about data infrastructures? Are we talking about
e-infrastructures?
Okay, they are essential, because without the e-infrastructures, nothing will run. As without data, there's nothing there. So I always see this as what I call a yin-yang situation. The e-infrastructures without any data in them doesn't mean anything. Data without e-infrastructures is nothing. It's only in your head. So it's the two together that builds the reality. So e-infrastructures are absolutely essential. And I think they are referred to, well, many, many times in the consultation document.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. So I think what we could do is we could move to questions regarding the association. And the first one is regards the actual expressions of interest, which is open at the moment. Sarah, I know you may have something to say on how long this is going to be open for, and who can apply, if you could.
Yeah, sure. So EOSC is open. It's one of its principles. So the membership of the association will always be open as well. So there is this expression of interest form. In future, the association may choose to change that process. They might have slightly different form, but you know, that there'll always be some mechanism to apply, and I encourage you to do that at any point. So I see, you know, there are questions. Somebody had asked about the membership fee, which is still being defined. The association needs to try and get an understanding of how many members they may have and what kind of budget they need to be able to set those fees, but that's something that will have to be clarified before December. So we will have more information on that shortly as the association gets set up. But you know, you can express interest now, and that's something that makes sure that you get relevant information on the association, and then you can join at any stage that's appropriate for you. There was also a question about ministries and what you should do because ministries aren't able to be members themselves. within statutes, there's a mechanism for countries to mandate a certain organization. So there may be an existing legal entity which will join and they'll kind of represent the countrywide view. Or you could set up associations to join if there isn't a body that already is applicable. So it's open to any groups to join, whether that's an individual university or some kind of collective membership body. So it's really down to you. What are the best ways to kind of represent your views through the EOSC Association?
Thanks, Sarah. A question again, sorry for my pronunciation, Etienne Orge. Is membership of associations of universities favoured over membership of individual universities? And does the EOSC Association expect a specific role for associations of universities?
Maybe I can answer that, because CESAER is such an association of in this case, 54 engineering universities or universities of science and technology. I think the specific role for those is to, let's say, give their input based on the knowledge they have from all these universities and the needs these universities have. But the individual universities themselves, of course, deal with their data and have their researchers that deal with the data. So the closer we are to the researchers thus dealing with the individual universities, the better it is. So there's different roles, I think, for these type of organizations. The knowledge that can come from an organization like the Guild or LERU or CESAER, for that matter, or AUA, is valuable because they have already a lot of, let's say, knowledge from their member organizations. There's an open science task force in CESAER, there's an open science task force in AUA, there is one in LERU, etc. So this knowledge can be brought into the association. But the association is there, of course, for the people that ultimately produce and use data, publications and software. And thus it's important for those parties to become a member as well. There's one additional smaller item worthwhile mentioning. Most of these associations live on the contribution of their own partners. So they are relatively poor compared to the partners they represent. So it's important that it is recognized that also the more, let's say, powerful partners in terms of financial contributions are there as well. And I could imagine, Nick, but this is thinking ahead, maybe a year or two, that ultimately several of these umbrella organizations, like now Science Europe already decided from the beginning, become observers rather than real members. So that means that they don't have any voting right anymore. But one vote in many, if there's hundreds of members, doesn't mean anything, or doesn't mean too much anyway. But they still can contribute with their knowledge and learn from the association. So ultimately, the role for many of these organizations may be better placed as observers in the system.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I was muted. Okay, I think there's just one question from which is not about the association. Ellie Dyke, which asks, will certification like CTS be one of the rules of participation? I know that Juan was on just before. I think he's just popped off.
Yeah, I can answer, don't worry. So this is part of one of the actions for the FAIR Working Group to define FAIR related kind of criteria to fit into the rules of participation. So we have a group that François Geneve's leading, which is looking at FAIR metrics and certification of services. So in terms of certification of services, we've picked up on Quartra Seal for repositories, and we will be recommending that as like a rule of participation. The one thing we have to watch is that we don't make EOSC, we don't set the barrier too high. So while a number of repositories have certifications already, you know, a lot of repositories which we would want to be federated into EOSC don't. So I think the recommendation we're likely to give is that we encourage Core Trust Seal certification now, and we prefer it, but we have a kind of timeline for people to adopt that. And I know there's a lot of work going on through the likes of FAIR's Fair and a lot of national initiatives to support repositories to get those certifications. So I think, you know, in the kind of like 3 to 5 year window, it could be a mandatory requirement, but I think we have to be cautious about any mandatory requirements right at the start, because we want to ensure that people can federate into EOSC and that it's not too restricted a group, otherwise you undermine the value of it.
Okay, just staying on the topic of FAIR with you, Sarah, there's a question just now in from Viel Tenhunen. What is EOSC in relation to other initiatives and organizations working with FAIR data like GoFair, RDA Europe, WDS, etc.?
So we try and collaborate with as many people as we can. So within the FAIR working group, we have various members who are involved in all of these initiatives in RDA and GoFair, and various other kind of like national projects. So like in Denmark, they had a big national FAIR project. We are specifically looking at outputs from the different groups. So I know the Co-Creation Fund has supported a number of activities around FAIR. So groups looking at FAIR in certain disciplines or looking at FAIR for hardware. And we want to draw all of the things that come in out of those co-creation projects back into the group, or if they're relevant for some of our outputs, like the interoperability framework, to take those recommendations. I think one recently that I saw was about using DDI, for example, because it's like a generic form of DDI, not just for the social sciences, and that could be a really interesting input to that interoperability framework. And we are looking where there's outputs from groups. So within RDA, for example, there's been a very active group on developing FAIR metrics, so the maturity of FAIR. And we're taking recommendations from that group directly into what we put in there as the EOSC requirements.
Okay, thank you. So we have a question from Sergio Andriozzi from EGI. Does the SRIA clearly define who the primary users are in terms of consumer of service resources for the EOSC? Is this targeting the long tail researchers or the large organized research communities or research infrastructures?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I don't think the SRIA actually talks about the user. For me, the user of EOSC is the scientist, and ideally we would be getting a long tail, not just big science. And we do that by federating the infrastructure. So there is a role for the infrastructures, but I think more as bringing the communities into EOSC and as providing services. I don't know if you've got views on that too, Karel?
Yeah, I sometimes make the comparison with EduRoam, and EduRoam, of course, is a much simpler system to get access to the internet for the researchers. But I hope that ultimately EOSC will be something like EduRoam in a sense that the researcher continues to work with his repository, his system, his computing facilities, etc. And these repositories, these computing facilities and these services become a member of the EOSC and linked into a larger system. And then all of a sudden, this researcher finds it also works with another set of software or in another country or with another repository. Like in the beginning when EduRoam was developing, you found out, at least I found out, that, oh, in this university I can open my laptop and work as well. And here I can start working as well. And now in the Square in Delft, it works as well. So ultimately, the researcher is the end user, of course. We do this for the researchers, and the researchers are the ones using the data, providing the data. So it's service researchers for researchers, you could say. But as researchers drive a car, many of them never look under the hood in order to see how the technology works there. And this is the same thing with EOSC. I hope that the technology is working and that people are just using it and making the best use of it possible. So it's a little bit difficult to define who are the users. As with cars, initially the users were the technicians that made the cars. And then later on, every citizen became a user. And ultimately with EOSC, also every citizen may become a user in the long run.
Yeah.
Thanks, Karel. We're coming up to we're just past the top of the hour, but one very interesting question, particularly for you, Karel, from Gultiken Gödel, is what would be the main motivation for a university to become a member of EOSC?
Yeah, that's a good question, I think, because why would you join this party? Because it's developing anyway. I think that the main motivation would be that if you want to be, let's say, somewhat leading in this development and ahead of the pack, you should try and join the pack and contribute to this. There's another motivation. If researchers do this for researchers, then some of the people have to stick their neck out and do the work like we're doing now as an executive board for others. I will not benefit from EOSC. By that time, I'm dead and buried. But I don't mind. I can give my, let's say, working power and knowledge to this system for others to benefit from. So it depends a little bit on how altruistic researchers are, how much they are going to contribute. The same holds for universities. But I would stimulate universities to become a member, because if they are in the forefront of developing this system, they may end up with a better system than if they don't.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think, you know, EOSC should be of benefit to the research community and those research performing organizations at large. And if you want a voice to shape it and to make sure it goes in the direction that you want it to go in, you need to be at that table. So you join as a member and you know, actively make sure that the views of your organization and your community and their needs are represented, and being in the association is the way to do that.
Maybe, Nick, another comparison is the following. I've been president of CESAER for 4 years, and I very often got this question from universities: why should we become a member? And I said, it's very simple. If you become a member and pay the membership fee and never show up except for the General Assembly when you have a vote, I shouldn't do it. It's not wasting your money. The more you put into CESAER, the more you will get out of it. Of course, it will cost you more time and effort on top of the membership fee, which is very low, by the way, but then you get something out. And it's the same with EOSC. If you just become a member and pay the membership fee and never do anything else, then forget about it. Then it's not worthwhile, then you're only paying. No, if you are actively contributing, you get more out of it than you will put into it. Very simple. If you have 100 researchers that all put their data available for the 99 others, then you have more jointly than you have alone.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. So participation is key.
Absolutely.
Basically, participation is key. And this open consultation is a good first step as well for participation, not only for organizations, but also individuals. So I think we've addressed the majority of questions that have been put to us. And any that haven't, we'll try and get back to you as soon as possible. And there was a couple of questions, more practical questions on completing the open consultation. One regarding the word limit or the character limit, and some of the answers being a little restrictive. These are practical reasons. We expect a large amount of responses from the community. So a cap is needed on the responses. If you have anything that you cannot add, then you can, of course, contact us at the email info@EOSCsecretariat.eu. And you can provide that way. But the reason why we have a restricted text number is for that, because there will be a lot of information to digest. So I wondered, I just wanted to ask for if you have any final comments, Sarah or Karel, before we close.
No, just thank you for so many people coming, and we look forward to your responses in the consultation. You know, EOSC is for you, so do share your views, and then collectively we can get a much better SRIA at the end of it.
And I fully agree with that. It's perfectly said, Sarah. Thank you. And Nick, thank you for moderating this session.
Yeah, thanks.
No problem at all. What we'll do is we'll get back to people individually on the questions and answers, and the questions which are relevant. I think it might be a nice idea if we can publish some of these, because they're useful in general. Just highlight again that the symposium, the EOSC Symposium is back in October, 19th to 22nd of October. This will be, of course, online, as I'm sure everybody expected. It's part of the German presidency program, and registration will be open after the summer. As it's online, of course, I think we'd like to have the registration after the summer when we have sessions well formed and well defined, so that you can see exactly the best places that you can participate at and contribute to. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody. We had over 170 who actually joined today, which is fantastic. Thank you, Karel, and thank you, Sarah, and thank you to my colleague Federico and team at Trust IT and EOSC Secretariat. Thank you, everyone, and have a lovely summer.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
bye-bye.
Bye-bye.